Good morning, everybody. My name is Brian Kellenberger. Can everybody hear me? Microphone working good? We're having a little karaoke hour this morning. Just kidding. My name is Brian Kellenberger. I'm the Director of Beach Operations. Under my department is beach maintenance and beach code enforcement. So appreciate everybody coming today. It's our annual postseason vending meeting. So it's an opportunity for vendors and the general public to come and express what I call the good and the bad and the ugly of the year, to give us ideas on how to make code revision recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners. So every year we review the code and we try to figure out ways to make it better for all concerned. All concerned is, of course, our people that live here and enjoy the beach, the people that visit here and enjoy the beach, and the people that use the beach as a commercial enterprise. So before we get started, a few meeting etiquette items. If you've got cell phones on or other things, appreciate if you'd silence them. If you need to take a phone call or if you need to converse with your neighbor, I'd appreciate it if you take it out of the room. There's going to be a difference of opinion in here today, so please respect everybody's opinions and, more importantly, respect each other. There's no point in getting angry with somebody and taking it out on them verbally. The format today will be kind of like a town hall meeting. I'm going to give a few stats from the year, or we catalog everything we do code enforcement wise, and of course permits and all that. I'll give a few stats about the beach, about vending, about our code enforcement effort, and then we'll open it up to the room. And so what I ask people to do is present the problem, present a viable solution, and then we'll have some discussion about it. That discussion may be great idea. We're going to jot that down, and we're going to include it in the information we're taking in through various meetings and advisory committees and the data we've collected, and it will become part of the recommendations for code revision that we make to the TDC and the BCC. Discussion also might be me explaining the how and the when and the why we do take code enforcement action or we do not take code enforcement action. And some of it may be explanation of that's not a violation of the code, how it's written. And so understand that some people have ideas that vendors are non-compliant, and it may actually be a situation where the code's not fully understood. And so that'll be part of the discussion, and there'll be some back and forth and all that, I'm sure. But the main goal is to develop a list of items that will go forth as code revision recommendations. As we go through the couple hours, I think we have 2 hours scheduled here. That should be more than enough time, I think, to get all the ideas in. Afterwards, if anybody wants to talk, we can talk. We can talk at the bay. You can buy me lunch. And just kidding. But anyway, so as we go through it, if you have the same idea as somebody before, we certainly want to know that you have that feeling. And so it can be as very simple as, I support X. And I have a couple people taking notes with me today, and then we'll compile all these, and we will compile how many times we heard this one particular idea or recommendation. And so the other opportunities for input are on September 25th at 5 p.m., and that is a public workshop for beach management. And so it will be all of Chapter 22 and some other parts of the Land Development Code that concern the beach. And then we've had 2 advisory committees. So I'm the liaison for what's called the Beach Management Committee, and it's an advisory committee to the TDC. And then we also have a Destination Improvement Committee, which is also an advisory committee to the TDC. Both of those meet on the odd months. Beach Management meets on the first Tuesday, and Destination Improvement meets on the first Thursday of the month. They're public meetings just like this. We have a committee that hashes out things. We take in public input. They bring ideas. and they both help improve exactly what their title says. Beach management deals with beach management items. Destination improvement mainly deals with beautifying our public spaces. That'd be our beach accesses, the public right-of-ways in between the communities and all that. So I encourage y'all to come to those or shoot me ideas via email. I'll bring some cards in here if anybody doesn't have my email address. You can easily get it off our website, or it's very easy, brian@visitsouthwalton.com. So any questions about etiquette, format, purpose today? Okay, seeing none, we'll move forward. So a few stats. This year we had vendors, 163 permitted vendors. Compared to last year, we had 104. Part of that increase is we started permitting special event permitters and what we call, what's the title of the miscellaneous vendors? So those are people that don't put a product on the beach like chairs and umbrellas or paddle boards or whatever. They do photography. Some of them are the people that are subcontractors to special event coordinators. And then the actual number of permits. So a lot of vendors have more than one permit. We had 381 permits this year versus 272 last year. Once again, I think that increases us bringing the miscellaneous vendors into the fold. And some of it's increasing beach vendors. I'm sure y'all have all experienced more vendors on the beach. We've got a breakdown of those. Wedding event permit, permits 57, chairs, umbrellas 41, photography 42. And some of these people may cross over these different categories. Bonfire 4, water sports 9, and then the rest of them small, sand sculptures, concierge, parasail, jet ski, yoga, security, all 2 or less. Over the year, or up to this point, so our year is a fiscal year. We go from October 1st to September 30th. And this year, up to this point, so it's actually through August, we've had 9,187 total code enforcement contacts. So some of those contacts are what we call miscellaneous calls, meetings, and citizens contacts. If you take those out, there's been 7,690 actual enforcement contacts. That's where we got out and talked to somebody about a non-compliant issue with one of our codes. This year, we had our online complaint form up and operating. We had it last year, but it wasn't the whole year. And looking at the data, we're spending a lot more time chasing complaints than we are, riding down the beach in a proactive manner. We still are proactive, but our enforcement has become a lot more reactive. We're not dispatch oriented, but we do take complaints via the online form. It automatically goes into our ArcGIS mapping system. All the code enforcement officers have access to this in their trucks. It produces a dot, we call it chasing dots, on the map, and when you click on that dot, it gives you all the information about the complaint, the complainant, and all that. Of course, we catalog all that information as it comes in and other forms, and that'll be presented at a meeting in October at the TDC meeting, and of course it'll be published information that anybody can have if they want to call me and get it. It's what's called my annual Beach Code Enforcement Report, and it's got all this data in it. We're abbreviated right now because we haven't compiled all the data. So just going down through some of the things that we do. Glass, 790 contacts. Dogs are a big thing on the beach, very popular on our beach. 2,090 contacts for dogs. So we spend a lot of time chasing dogs. And about half the time they're compliant, and half the time they're not. And there's various ways they can be non-compliant. Out of time, out of permit, off leash, leave no trace public. And some of these don't give the complete picture because we had to change mid-year or towards the end of the year, definitely at first of summer. Leave no trace public, 267 instances. Leave no trace vendor, 119. Usually a leave no trace public is where they've left it overnight. Leave no trace vendor, maybe overnight, maybe early setup. Customary use, as you know, it went out of play July 1st. 138 contacts on that prior to it going out. Beach vendor miscellaneous, 355 contacts. Half of those were verbal warnings. Half were, or a large majority, written warnings. Some of them notice of violation because there's nobody there, or there was no violation observed. 100 of those were no violation observed, so 30% of the time it was a false complaint or a complaint that did not have merit. Bonfires, 2,156 contacts. There was 3,280 permitted bonfires last year up through August. There'll be more in September, of course. Vehicles no permit, 114. Miscellaneous vehicle permit violation is very small at 10. Driving outside the designated area, believe it or not, we got signs on both sides of Grayton, but people don't want to observe those, 78. And then the rest of them, special event contacts, 278. That's what we got out at a special event permit. Any ideas how many special event permits we did? Then the rest of the items are very small. You know, double red flags. We actually had 193 of those. We had several days where we had double red flags. And we help out the South Walton Fire District with keeping people out of the water. Littering, small fishing, we have shark fishing. Steel-bladed shovels, 110. That was our attempt to keep people from digging large holes and leaving them. And then tents, 77. And then wildlife lighting, we had 26 cases on that. We've done a pretty good job on that. Hey, buddy. So those are the some kind of stats on our code enforcement activity. We have 11 officers, 10 officers and 1 manager, and we cover the beach from 5:30 in the morning to 11 at night, 11:30 to midnight. And so you can see that, spread out over 26 miles of beach. We do some code enforcement on state parks. So we're spread out fairly thin, but we're able to cover it. And a lot of it's, like I say, done by complaint driven. So as we get complaints in, we'll the officer in charge or officers assigned to that zone, we have 4 zones, they'll pick them up and prioritize them based on what they are, where they are, and proximity to getting there. So that's our code enforcement activity. Any questions on that? Okay. Yeah. So I have that published, and I'll be glad to send that to you. If you just want to, I have it now, but if you'll send me a quick email or to Tricia or Melanie, they'll send you that report, and just include the word summary, and so you'll get a summary like this, and it's easy to compare. I don't have it compared to year over year like that, but you could do it very easily. Yes, sir, Dave. I don't have that in front of me. I just asked for this quickly this morning. I usually don't catalog that breakdown, but I asked for it. I was curious. I'll get it to you. Okay, so now is a time where we'll allow the people in the audience to speak. I'm going to ask you to speak in the microphone because even though it is projecting through the room, but more importantly, it's recording this. So we're recording by audio and by video, so people can observe us. They can actually watch us live now, and of course they can go back and watch and see what we said and all that. So I ask that you just state your name, and then once again the issue. What you think a viable solution is, and then we'll have some discussion about it. So, yes, ma'am.
Lori Reichenbach. I am here representing a non-vendor group, but a active group, Volunteer Beach Ambassadors. The problem is low tide chairs are set up at the water line. Within 2 hours, water floats up under chairs. With the revocation of customary use, beach ambassadors and all citizens of Florida are forced to the wet sand just to traverse and take a walk. So as our volunteers have attempted to work through the year, many times they have to wait in the water because the vendor chairs are already taken over by the tide. The solution I would propose is that the vendors are asked to respect wet sand, whatever those hours are through the day, and not set up early in the morning at the water line, but set up at the projected water line by late afternoon, high tide, so that citizens of Florida can traverse, and volunteer beach ambassadors who are picking up trash, trying to educate our tourists and our locals, have a way to ingress and egress across the sand. So I'm asking for respect of the wet sand throughout all hours of the day.
Okay. And that would be on public and private beach? Yeah. Right. So on private beach, we don't have the 15-foot clear zone, but we do on public beach. Okay. All right. Mm-hmm. Right. Yep.
If the beach vendor needs to set up to prevent that, then I think they also should be made aware that with the change in tide, they'll have to remove their umbrellas and chairs and move them back. So that seems like a lot of trouble.
Seems like an easy enough thing to include in recommendations. Daryl, can you give me a hand getting a microphone around the room? Daryl is one of our code enforcement officers. We hire the biggest and the best we can get out of Walton County.
It's Barbara Morano. It's obvious, Brian, your code enforcement officers are doing a lot of work by your statistics. However, we're hearing that there's not enough code enforcement on the beach. So there's a discrepancy from what you're reporting and what the locals and people are also saying. You mentioned you had 10 officers, 1 management. However, I think I heard you say once you only have 4 on the beach. Is that correct?
Right. So during the day, the distribution of time, we start at 5:30 in the morning. Next officer comes on when, Jeff? We'll let Jeff answer this question.
The evening shift guys come on at 1:30.
Okay.
I guess my question is, why are there only 4 on the beach?
Well, once again, in order to cover it from the time during the day for 7 days a week, obviously we all work 40 hours a week. So the solution, I think, would be more code enforcement officers on the beach. And one of the balances we have is during the peak season, we obviously need more, and then during the non-peak season, we may not need as many. And we also, even though we enjoy a good revenue stream, we do, have some limits on what we can spend on what's called operations and maintenance. The first 2 pennies, marketing, operations, and maintenance all come out of that.
My second concern is the neighborhood beach accesses, which are very narrow.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pulling this out of the Visions page. The concern is when the vendors are on the neighborhood beach accesses, which is what, 25 feet sometimes, 50 feet? Mm-hmm. The concerns are that there should be no vendors on the neighborhood beach accesses, especially since customary use is still being debated. There's not any room for people to set up their chairs. What are your restrictions on vendors in the neighborhood beach accesses, and also go over what your restrictions are in the public?
Okay. So at neighborhood beach accesses, we have a couple of different scenarios at neighborhood beach accesses. First of them is ownership. Some of them the county owns outright. Some of them are on road right-of-ways, which is another form of ownership, and some of them are on easements across private property. And so in 2015, let me add to this, and some of the neighborhood beach accesses go down to the mean high water line in between private property, and some of the neighborhood beach accesses actually go down onto public beach that is seaward of the Gulf Front property parcel. And that would be in places like Sea Highlands and Sea Grove, where we actually own a fairly large stretch of beach from Toe of Dune to Water's Edge, and we have several neighborhood beach accesses that come down and onto that beach. All right, so 2015 we established the vendor zones, and it was originally recommended that it be, vendor zones only be applied to beaches that were 100 feet or greater. So recognizing that narrow beaches would not really be the best place to have the vendor zone. Unfortunately, during that discussion and decision-making time, it was decided to be applied to all. And then further inquiry with legal department as to can we even put a vendor zone on a public beach access that is contained on a easement? The answer was no. And so that's why you have some neighborhood beach accesses that do not have vendor zones at all. And then the ones that are very narrow, think Sea Breeze, Sea Crest, those come down in between private property. We do not have vendor zones on those because they're 10 feet and 20 feet. And then the ones in Sea Highlands, Sea Grove, Dune Allen area, where we have public beach in front of the Gulfront property, we have the vendor zones that are spaced. They were originally put in compliant to the 50% rule. But since they're long and linear, we didn't want to put half here and leave the other half, so we put them in frequencies. However, because of paragraph D8 that gives the upland property the ability to say yay or nay to vending, those vendor zones move around some, and they also get completely omitted because we run out of room to put them. And we try to put them on boundary lines to make it easy, like say, for the people that, so when D8 applies to it, it's easier if they're on boundary lines versus halfway across the property or not. See what I'm saying? So regional beach accesses, we have them segmented in half the regional beach access. The ones on the regional beach accesses work like they're intended to. The ones on neighborhood beach accesses, we have some problems. So back to the ones that have easements, where we don't have vendor zones. Vendors are allowed to vend there unless we get a complaint from the upland property owner that says I don't want vendors on that property. But they're not restricted to a vendor zone because there's not one there. Sugar Dunes is one of those. We have a few other, and then there's some areas where we actually have an easement on the upland portion, but we own the beach. And so that makes it a little funny there too. Does that answer your question? And so your solution to that would be to not allow vending at all on neighborhood beach accesses that do not have some form of vendor restricted zone. Can you hear better now? Okay, sorry. Okay. Okay, so a solution to that would be to not allow vending on neighborhood beach accesses where we do not have a vendor restricted zone or a vendor zone. And those would include neighborhood beach accesses on easements, less than a certain amount of feet. We would have to designate, a certain amount of feet, because we do have some neighborhood beach accesses that are on 66-foot road right-of-ways or 60-foot road right-of-ways. So we could designate a less than, or anything less than certain footage. Okay. Next.
Good morning. I'm Diane Bradburn, and wanted to thank several of the vendor companies who have actually helped me in the past, but it hasn't been enough. And so as far as the vendors go, I'm asking your help. Those of you who use those little orange rubber bands to keep your umbrellas together, I am finding those every day on the beach. I don't walk very far. I walk from Seagrove to Seaside and back, and on average I'm picking up minimum 24 of those. And and I've watched what happens too. You use them to wrap up your umbrellas, then then your customers go down and they take them off, but by that time they've sort of shredded and they go flying out into the sand. So I have asked for your help, and some of you have complied. Brian has helped as well by sending the message out. And I actually have seen a slight decrease in the number of orange rubber bands. Unfortunately, now what I'm finding is that some of the companies, they're not using the orange rubber bands. Now they're reverting to natural colored rubber bands, which are a total disaster because I can't see them, so I can't pick them up for you. Simple solution. A lot of the companies out there, I think you guys use little bits of rope and whatever. They might be a little more cumbersome for your guys to use, but a lot less harmful. So that's my big request for you guys, is to switch from that. The other thing, for those of you who do the bonfires and the catering, the styrofoam plates have got to go, because I can constantly pick up bits and pieces of styrofoam plates up and down the beach. So those are my two requests for your help. I think it's pretty easy to solve that problem.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else would like to speak? I mean, you can comment on, like I say, the good, what was bad, you know, what you think needs to change. This is an opportunity to provide input. Yes, sir.
My name is Fred Bueller. One of the things we've been discussing for a while is trying to manage the setups that are along the water, the number of them, the number of sheer vendors that are at an access. Nobody knows. I mean, it grows and shrinks at will. But the solution that seems to solve a lot of these problems is assigning one vendor per beach access. If one vendor is there, then first of all, you don't have vendors competing with each other to get the prime locations along the water. You can ask them to not set up the chairs until the people arrive at the beach, to keep the beach open for other people who are walking down. It just seemed, I mean, okay, there's a lot more to it, but I think the one vendor per access would solve a lot of the problems. It would start giving accountability. I mean, just any issues at all at the access, you guys know exactly who it is that you have to go call and talk and deal with. You no longer have to guess which vendor it was.
Okay.
That's my idea.
Okay.
Sir, will you say your name again for us, please, sir?
Fred Bueller,
Fred Bueller.
B-U-E-H-L-E-R.
Thank you, sir.
I know you don't want to repeat what issue was brought up, but since you were taking tallies about how many times it is brought up, I don't know what to do except to say I reinforce what this man said.
Okay.
Sarah Commander said it at the commissioners' meeting, that there should be one particular vendor at each public access, and then they would be there all day. They would be in control. We won't have the ghost chairs, and this would seem to solve a lot of issues that the community has at these public beaches. So if you're tallying it, put another tally next to that suggestion, and if anyone else still needs to speak on this topic before we go off, that might help you in your plan. Does anyone else want to talk about having one vendor at each public access as opposed to many vendors? What that would do would cut down on your ghost chairs, and it would just seem to be more control. Anyone else?
Hi, Lisa Bauschy. I'd like to reiterate that. I think it's especially significant at regional beach accesses. And then, Brian, there's what, 2 or 3 other accesses that are not considered regional beach accesses, but they're very large public areas. Reserving the beach on public areas in particular has just become a significant problem. And if we can figure out ways, and this is one of those ways, to prevent reserving the beach when there are not people present actually using the beach, I think it will help mitigate a lot of the angst that we're experiencing as a community. So I'm all for either one vendor per regional location or two if you think that's needed. Or if the vendors can somehow among themselves work out something that allows them to have a person at each location all day long, whether they share the expense of that or whether they each have their own or whatever. I'd love for the vendors to help resolve this problem instead of having to be dictated to. But if it's not solved by the vendors, I don't think we're left with much choice.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. So what everybody's referring to, and the last few speakers, is what is commonly known as a managed vendor program for public beaches. And it would be similar in nature to how a resort community does their vending. So vendors, is there any comments? Would anybody like to talk about it? You know, people that are delivery vendors, any cons or agreements or any other discussion on it?
I'm not a beach chair vendor, but I do agree with the fact of management because Reagan Beach is probably going to do a lot. Hi, my name's Chandler. One of those things that would help management is when you're at the beach and you have kids running around and a wind storm pops up and it's unmanaged and you have 60 to 70 chairs, just to say Reagan Beach alone, and they're flying objects. I think over 3,000 people were impaled this summer across, not in Walton County, but in U.S. Is that those chairs are just unmanaged. So the locals end up trying to help out, lifeguards help out, trying to drop these chairs before they become lethal and dangerous because these chairs are set and left. So I would agree with that as far as one of those reasons as far as managed beach
Okay.
chairs.
Do any vendors have an opinion on this?
Matt McGarris, South Walton Turtle Watch. Just from my viewpoint, for what I do, and I handle all the violations, and I deal with a lot of the vendors, I know where there is a manager on duty, and the beaches that have a manager or attendant at all times, those are probably the easiest to deal with. Problems get rectified quickly, they're the easiest to get a hold of. I would say most of my issues come with, honestly, drop-off delivery, who did it, where the chair's at. It's much harder. So management's always the way to go. Let's hold the guys accountable. I can get hold of these people, and it seems to be easier.
Okay. Chip?
Good morning. I'm Chip Coble, Beach Chairs for You. Might be the initial start of a lot of this issues because I've been at it now on 38 for 30 years. And granted, we've got a lot of issues. They're growing pains. It's a good problem to have in a tourist area. And most of these vendor sets are used by our guests that help pay y'all salaries, help do the bike path, yada, yada. Very few, but some locals still call. Used to years ago more than now because it's gotten very hard in some cases because of the D8 and the view and enforcement. Carol Roshkoff, Dave's wife, used to call me in Old Seagrove and say, "Hey, Chip, set me up out here. I'm going to the beach with my friends." Almost impossible to do now. A lot of the Gulfront McMansions, hey, we don't want those vendors behind our house. So what happens? All the vendors get shoved down to a regional beach access. Gotten to the point where I hate to do it, but I tell local folks, I can't set you up at a local beach access unless you want to sit with 32 other, chairs and umbrella sets.
Right.
Your ghost set issue is a lot of the seasonals. And granted, looks real good to your checkbook in December, January, when you got homeowners from all over the Southeast sending you checks, but doesn't work out so well when there are no vendor zones left and everybody's being forced down to Bramble Grove or Grayton Beach. I don't know what the answers are, but I know that with a little bit of thought and a little bit of effort, we can probably figure it out. And at the same time, it is a good problem to have. We could all be sitting here wondering, how are we going to get our guests back? And that's about all I got to say on that right now.
Okay. Chip, appreciate it. So a few things Chip touched on there is what we call paragraph D8. and that's what's known as the upland property authorization. So the way the code reads, it says that any public beach that has upland property adjacent to it and their southern boundary is contiguous to the public beach, that any vending on that property has to have the property owner, any vending on that public beach in front of that property has to have that property's authorization, paragraph D8. It was originally intended, it was put into the code in the 2005-2006 time period at a revision then to help offset some of the angst associated with the beach renourishment project we did on the western end of the beach that goes from Topsail State Park to the Walton-Okaloosa County boundary. The reason it was put in there is the property owners, that Gulfront property owners that were having their southern boundary of a main high water line converted to an erosion control line were concerned that Walton County would allow vending on that new public beach seaward of their beach. At the time, people didn't realize it, or it wasn't affecting property on 30A. And the difference is 30A property that has that situation, they have it doesn't apply because that beach has not been renourished. When I say it doesn't apply, it applies because it's written in the code, and we have to enforce the code as it's written. But it was not intended for that section of 30A. And it creates some problems. Depending on which side of the fence you're on, it creates problems if you're a vendor and you want to service a client that is north of 30A at one of our numerous public beach accesses in Seagrove and Sea Highlands and on down through the rest of Seagrove proper, because that's where the biggest problems are. That's where we have the most public beach seaward of Gulfront property. So, so one of the questions may be, how do we deal with D8 and how do we deal with D8 in vendor zones? And so there's a couple ways you could do it. You could just say, hey, we're omitting the vendor zones and we're going to allow D8 to operate like it's written. In other words, if you want to vend on that public beach in front of that private property, you'd have to seek that property's authorization. Or we could do away with D8 and say they're all public beaches and vendors are allowed to vend on the public beach. We would probably have to go back to the vendor zone situation, and they would be more frequent and smaller so that you could spread out, the people better. Instead of packing everybody into a 100-foot strip, you'd have, some 50-foot strips more frequent. Or if there could be some sort of self-regulation by vendors to not create the problems that exist on public beach. When I say the problems, it's the problems that are perceived by the general public that wants to enjoy the beach without renting a vendor set. Those problems are early setups. So the vendors come down. It's been explained to me that the operating techniques is we set our chairs up early in the morning, right after we're cleared by Turtle Watch. And we don't take them down until the end of the afternoon at 4:30 or 5 p.m. And so what happens is you reserve the beach by your for your guests north of 30A who may not come down until 11 or 10 or may not come down at all. And so those are things that would have to be worked out because the codes, if they have been revised over the last couple of years, have been trying to counter those two main problems. Early setup of the vendor chair to reserve that seat on the beach, so to speak, and then what's called the ghost set. These are all on public beaches. On private beaches, it's a different issue because they're private beaches. Those vendors have contracts with those private property owners, and they're regulated by that contract or that understanding of how they'll do business. So those are a couple of things, and you'll see those come up because those have been those two issues: ghost sets on public beach, vendor zones in conjunction with paragraph D8. All that has been already sent to us, and we've already discussed it in the two advisory committee meetings. So some of those will come up. Paragraph D8 is 2260 subparagraph D, subparagraph 8 in the chapter 22. So everything we talk about today, it's Walton County Municipal Code, chapter 22, waterways and beaches activities. And then 2260 is the section of the code that deals with vendors and vendor activity. And there's many sections in it. 2254 is general use of the beach. Usually refers to how the public is allowed to use the beach. And then there's other code sections on the beach driving permits, special events, aircraft. So people refer to it as beach activities ordinance. The actual proper name is Walton County Municipal Code, Chapter 22, waterways and beaches activities. And so ordinances are usually acts of legislation. County code is what comes from acts of legislation, revision or adoption of a new code. And all this can be found by typing into your browser Walton County Muni Code, M-U-N-I code, and it'll come up, and then it'll have a table of contents, and you can go down through. It's a searchable document and all that, so if you're interested in a particular thing, you can just type in. Okay, is there any opinion by vendors on how vendors should be allowed to vend on public beach? I mean, this is the time to talk, and so I'm curious. We've heard a lot from people that are not vendors, and so I would like to hear from vendors. Bonnie, are you a new vendor? Yeah, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding with you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just citizen, resident, been here 26 years.
Yep.
And I'm sitting here listening, and my question is, on a public beach that belongs to the public, how can anyone reserve any place on a public? How can someone reserve a place on a public beach? Can I reserve a place on a public beach?
Well, actually, that's the name of the game in Walton County.
Excuse me?
I said, actually, that's the name of the game in Walton County. And so it's not that you're reserving it as in I'm going down and, there's actually a acceptable or something written that says you can do it. It's just a general practice. And so, like I explained earlier, the delivery vendors, their basic operational standards are that they set up first thing in the morning.
I understand that.
Okay, well, let me finish. But the general public also does the same thing. In fact, if you go down to the beach early in the morning, Turtle Watch can back me on this, you will see people lined up with their equipment waiting for the Turtle Watch person to walk by. And then it's the race to the water's edge by the vendor, by the vendor and by the general public to put their chairs at the water's edge. And so, so it happens on all of our beaches. If you go out, you'll see the dads of the world pulling wagons to the beach to set up their tents, their chairs, and then they'll go back home, and the family will come back at about 9:30 or 10, and they'll leave about 11 o'clock, go home for lunch for a couple of hours, and then they'll come back down there. The whole time, their setup is there, reserving their space. And the reason I say it's the name of the game in Walton County is because I observed a picture of the Seaside Amphitheater in a scheduled movie at 7 p.m. By 2 p.m., the whole green had blankets and chairs set up on it that were empty. People were reserving their space. And so, no, there's not a code that says you can do it. That's just the general practice, and it comes from not enough space. And so I got to go reserve my space if I'm going to have a space that I want on the beach. The other thing is everybody that comes to Walton County wants to sit on the water's edge. We're slowly getting away or accepting that we're going to have to sit second, third, fourth tier on the beach. But up until 2 years ago, it was what I call the race to the water's edge.
Okay, well, I agree with some other people who've spoken here that it should be, someone wants a chair, that is put out at that time, not lined up along the water in the morning. I know that, let's say someone like Redfish Village, if they get a contract, every morning go set up 25 chairs for no, that should not be allowed. I'm sorry.
Okay.
That's just my opinion.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Yes, sir, you can. If you would wait for the microphone, I appreciate.
I know that you guys have researched, oh, I don't need a mic.
Yeah, it helps us record the conversation.
I know that you guys have researched this a lot, and there's always going to be conflicting opinions. And of course, if we had customary use, this would be less problematic. However, I'm always a proponent of not reinventing the wheel and looking to other parts of the state that have already fleshed out this situation. Even Europe, for instance, there's got to be someone out there that it's already figured out most of these issues, and I think that might be beneficial. That's all.
Very good point, Dave. So, as part of my duties, I have looked to the east and west of us to see what our neighbors are doing. In my travels throughout the state for conferences or seminars, first thing I do is check out the beach to see what they're doing. And in most cases, what is being done is what's called the managed vendor program. And it's usually in the form of a concession agreement. Some forms of that are a base bid and then sharing of revenue or profits. Sometimes it's lottery system and then a sharing of revenue or profits. But that's how they do it. And we refer to it, or it has been referred to, as a managed vendor program. And then so within that, a couple things that you have to do. Those first things I just talked about. How do you decide which vendor or vendors are going to have the privilege of vending on that public space? How do you write the contract agreement? And that contract agreement, of course, is the compensation exchange, and then the standards of operation. We've already had a few ideas on that. Chairs can't be set out until the person that is using the chair gets there, and when they leave for the day or for an extended period of time, that chair gets taken up. Attendance on duty, storage, requirements. Even for, you can dig down a little bit deeper into uniforms, equipment, type, logoed, and all that. So it's there's a lot to get to the bottom of what that final product or that agreement looks like. But it would solve some of the problems we have. It would create problems in other areas, for the industry.
Well, I think everybody appreciates that you're trying to take a fair approach,
Mm-hmm.
and that's important.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
I appreciate that idea and the idea of the management thing. The only thing that concerns me a little bit is that out of the gazillion of vendor companies down there, you've got a lot of really big companies and probably well-established companies with a lot of money behind them. Then you've got some pretty small companies, newer companies that are doing a great job out there. Actually, in my observation, the smaller companies were the ones who were taking more care of the beach and the surrounding after the fact. So that would be one thing I'd want you to keep in mind as you go through that process, is to make sure that it doesn't, if it's a matter of a contract type idea, that the smaller companies aren't left out somehow.
Right. Yeah. So you keep in mind this, if the Board of County Commissioners decides to embark on this process, the way I see it happening is public workshops to start defining those components I talked about. And then also, if we applied it to the regional beach accesses, we're talking about, a very, very small percentage of the beach front. Okay? So a lot of delivery vendors start out as delivery vendors to public beach. And then they slowly acquire specific place permits, and some of them actually move out of the delivery vendor arena because it's a hard vending business. It's turf wars. It's it's hard to please a client when you have the restrictions that are on them now on the vendor. Vendor zones. Making sure they don't run afoul of any other enforcement issues. And so, you know, it's a logical progression. But, so, you know, like I say, I don't see it happening quickly. It's something that would have to be discussed, you know, developed, and then, you know, a period of time before it was implemented so that the people that are in the industry now could decide if they want to continue to participate in the industry or if, you know, government regulations and practices of how they can vend are too burdensome and they would need to get out. The other thing, too, is that, you know, there's a certain amount of product needed on the beach. It takes a certain amount of people to do that, get that product out there. And so, you know, a managed vendor program on a public beach might not necessarily mean that they can't still make money in the industry. It may mean a different way of making money. Instead of being a owner-employer or owner-operator, they may become a employee or a subcontractor or something like that. So a lot of things to think about. You know, at face value, you know, the understandable argument of that kind of program is it's going to put a lot of people out of business. And as you look into it some more, it may not, I mean, it may put some owner-operators out of business, but it doesn't mean they're not going to have opportunity to be gainfully employed in South Walton. Okay.
One of the good things about vendors on the public beach is you've asked that they don't have vendor boxes, correct? That they take their chairs and they bring them back out.
Well, actually, the way the code reads is that only specific place vendors are allowed to have storage boxes on the property that they have a permit for. Mm-hmm. The code reads that you're not allowed to speculative vend on public property, all right? And so and also we don't allow them to have boxes there because the way the code reads it the other way. What we do allow them to do is to store their product at the toe of the dune. The code does allow for this, provided the equipment is to be used the next day, all right? And so if you have a weekly or annual contract, then that satisfies that requirement of being used. We used, used, and rented synonymous.
I think that's a big issue about vendors storing their chairs at the toe of the dune, whether they're in a box or not. Solutions, well, the answer is you don't do it. But getting back to what you said, Bonnie, Redfish Village, I'll use that as an example. Redfish Village bought that land, and that is theirs. They set it up. They leave it for all their customers. So the elephant in the room here is customary use. When and hopefully we do have customary use, we have to be very careful when you have owners that are still paying HOA fees for that land, and then you're going to give this to another vendor to come and set up. So these are issues that I know you can't solve right at this moment, but that's going to be a big issue for those vendors that are essentially like resort vendors on that particular property.
You know, I would expect that any customary use law has heavy restrictions. You know, the previous customary use code we had only had a handful of what I call allowable uses, and those were the ones that are usually described in a customary use context. You know, sunbathing, fishing, swimming, chair, and you know, we actually had some restrictions. You know, you could not have tents, you could not commercial vend. You actually had other restrictions like no dogs, no smoking, and so any new customary use will actually, I don't see anywhere where that would allow commercial vending on private property, and so that's not going to be a problem.
Yeah, okay. And Dave, you brought that up about Seaside. You know, that's still open, or that owners can still have the chairs there, but you're not stopping other people from using the beach. Am I right?
The central commercial area of Seaside is the access to the public per Robert Davis, and it's been that way for 40 years. But that's different from the other traditional neighborhood developments.
I run the beach at Seaside.
And you were the first beach vendor ever.
Yes.
Right?
One of the first. Seaside, there's a big misunderstanding of how it's set up. Basically, the way it works, the center of town, Robert has always generously opened that up to the public. Make no mistake, that is private property you cross to get there.
Right.
A lot of people come down there and say, my tax dollars pay for this. Well, that's not the case. You are crossing private property
Yep.
to get to that section of the beach, unlike the homeowners who want to control their section of the beach.
Right.
So,
Yeah. So what
he is one of the only resort areas that has and always has opened it up to the public. You can go up and down 30A and go to Watercolor, Rosemary, Alice Beach, Sandestin, the Hilton. You're not getting in there if you're not staying there.
Right. Yep. Appreciate you clarifying that.
And I would like to say also that, brain farting, that a lot of times when folks call, I mean, local, I feel like, you know, when you say vendor sets, if Jeff wanted to come down with his family and sit in Seagrove Beach on a Sunday after church, any citizen of Walton County, if they call Chip with Beach Chairs for You for 30 years ago, I said, sure, we'll find you a seat.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, if you called and said, hey, I've got a house on North Andalusia, and I love that so much on Sunday that I want to do that every day for my rental house all summer, you know, I would go, no, I can't do that. Now, I'll walk a half a mile to find you a spot for you and your family or for a guest in their family to sit. And chairs and umbrellas or shade, it's a luxury in March and April. It's almost a necessity in May, June, July, August, September. You're not going to last long out there without some shade.
Right.
I can't help but think that there's got to be a way to figure it out. I know years ago, before they redefined vending was looked at as if you had an employee on the beach with signage and were actively trying to do business. That was a good definition of vending. Didn't really look at it or didn't include if you called and said, hey, I want to go to the beach today, can you do that for me? Sure, we'll find a spot. Somewhere along the way, it got changed to, if it's a commercial umbrella and chair, then it's a vintage set of chairs. You know, they just about fixed it so that I can't even give a set away. If somebody calls and says, hey, I want a set for, I get down there and it's a combat wounded veteran or it's a mama struggling with a couple of kids, hey, you know what, sit today, it's on me. Now, it's tough, and I don't, like I said, I don't know what the solution is, but it hurts my heart to see it happen. And I know that after having done it for 30 years and still having a 10-year-old, that I plan on doing it for another 10 to 15 years until I can get him out of school. And, you know, be it the codification of the beach or the customary use, yes, or customary use, no. I really admire the person that puts me out of business before I'm ready to get out of business. And I'll pass the mic at that.
No, so you know, Chip, I appreciate that. So, you know, we wouldn't need municipal code if everybody acted right. Okay, part of the problem you're describing there is that the delivery vendor, you know, used to do just that. You know, you called, they'd bring you a chair any time of the day, set it. A lot of times they wouldn't set your chair up; they'd bring it to your house. In fact, I think that was the original intent of the delivery vendor permit, and then it became, you know, more rental property north of 30A. And then the problem I talked about with getting a seat at the water's edge, and then, whoa, lo and behold, how about this convenience? My beach chair company will set up your chair for you, and it'll be there at 7 a.m. in the morning to make sure you get waterfront seat. Okay? And so that's why, you know, I was getting at on that paragraph D8. You know, I think the logical solution would be to remove paragraph D8 from the code or apply it only to where it should have been applied, where there's an erosion control line on the west end of the beaches. But there would have to be an understanding that the vendor industry then would not go down there and set up chairs across that whole beach at 7 a.m. in the morning. And so, you know, how do we do that? And then the other problem of, you know, really if you could solve that, so if you did away with weekly rentals or annual rentals and said that, you know, your guest has to be on the beach to accept the chair from you, that's going to change your industry a lot. You don't have the resources to do that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
I'm there again, and in order, when I started 30 years ago, I worked 16, 18 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
There was no TDC, there was no code enforcement. I started at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning if I needed to, and I would set up chairs straight through from 5 till 10 to get everybody happy.
Yeah.
You know, see.
Like I said, there's no doubt that the way the beach is used has changed. The way the people that service the people that are visiting the beach has changed. And that's why my original comment is everybody acted, you know, in, I don't want to say fair or logical manner, but those are words I like to use. You probably wouldn't need codes like this, but we don't, because we all want to get the best we can get, you know, for our clients or for ourselves. And it ends up, you know, back to the root problem, which is congestion on the beach. If we had 100 more feet of beach between Toa Dune and Water's Edge, some of these problems would go away. You know, if we had more public beach that, you know, had appropriate use restrictions on it, a lot of these problems would go away. By and large, number one complaint that I talk to people about is the ghost set. You know what I mean? They don't mind sitting behind vendors. Their chairs are being used, but if a vendor chair is empty, it makes them, you know, very unhappy, and they call us. They are. I mean, I've spoke with industry members, you know, on numerous occasions of, hey, we got to manage the ghost sets. In fact, this year we actually did a practice of you know, understanding that there would be more product at the toe of the dune during the day as a way of managing the ghost set. Because one of the arguments of the delivery vendor is it's dangerous for the vendor employee and dangerous for the general public to both be traversing the boardwalk, the public boardwalk. And that's a very understandable argument. And so that's why there's allowed storage at the toe of the dune at public beach accesses by vendors. And so, like I said, early this year, you know, Brian, go sets. Contacted some of the bigger delivery vendors, and I said, listen, you know, we got to figure out how to manage go sets on the daily basis. If there's a way that you can get your client to let you know if they're not going to be there that day, we will in turn understand that there's going to be more product at the toe of the dune during the day. And it worked a little bit, but like everything else, it gets exploited. And so, you know, y'all have heard me say it many times, you know, the vendors need to, you know, learn self-regulation. You know, learn, first understand the issue and figure out a way to solve it before the general public comes to me and demands that I solve it. So, is there any comments from vendors? Vendors have not talked a whole lot today. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry, David. Yeah, go ahead.
Some folks making two comments. I've been waiting for a while.
Yeah, man.
I am a beach vendor, I guess, by a specific place for Rosemary Beach, and some of the staff are here as well. But two comments. One is, Brian, I appreciate you making the statement that I hope everybody registered, that I don't think it's the county's position that if customary use comes into play, that vending will be considered an ancient use of our private beaches. Dave, my good friend Dave Roshkob, I just want to make sure we don't have an uncontested statement that creates an impression that suddenly delivery vendors are going to have access to all 17 miles of the beach. It's not subject to ECL.
Mm-hmm.
But as a member of the general public, some of the comments about whether you call it ghost sets or the on the beach management of delivery vendors' chairs product when a customer shows up and they're put out on the beach. You know, the ghost set, the empty set, is generating value for the vendors, the delivery vendors. And as a member of the public, when I have to either walk further down the beach to find a public section of beach to put my family with the tent and all the gear the kids require, or I have to sit behind one of those sets that's empty, effectively there is no member of the public present who's the customer of that delivery vendor. So at that point, the delivery vendor is generating revenue off public property. I don't think there was a comment that you made that was echoed from a couple other comments here, that somehow it's equivalent if I go down as a member of the public and put up a tent and then go back home and get the kids and bring them down, that's kind of the same thing as a go set. It's not the same thing at all. I'm not conducting a commercial activity. I'm a tax-paying member of the public using a beach that, in my neighborhood.
Right.
So I think it's dangerous for us to somehow draw any sort of equivalence there. The cost of doing business as a specific place vendor is very high. Every business is different, but as order of magnitude, it's about 50% of the revenue you're going to spend on staff that are there all the time, on maintaining walkovers, and all the other stuff that goes along with operating on a private piece of property. While I have a great deal of respect for the guys that have been around here for a long time, they've essentially generated an industry that all the rest of us are benefiting from. It is helping people off the beach rent houses and things like that. The unfortunate reality is there's a cost of doing business in every industry. And I think many citizens here that don't operate beach services, I think it's very respectful to suggest the vendors as an industry either need to figure this out, how to deal with the go sets, and how to address the fact that public property, when there was no member of the public there, it is a private industry using public property. And I can't set up a valet parking service outside this building and charge you all to park in public parking spaces. It's exactly the same thing. So we've got to get it clear, and I encourage the industry of delivery vendors to figure it out, because I think there's a growing number of people that have figured out this is the problem with delivery vending. It's the commercial use of private property unless there is a member of the public present. So, thank you.
Dave, appreciate your comments.
For that correction.
Yeah, Dave, I appreciate your comments. David is the general manager of Rosemary Beach. He has they do vending in-house. The comparison I was making was just for reserving of the space. You're right. I should have differentiated between one person is actually making money and one person is a member of the general public, enjoying the public beach. But the comment was made in the reservation of the beach and somebody not being there, and therefore any other member of the general public not being able to use that section of beach. And so you're right. Self-regulation is the key to this, is how to figure out, first understand what is affecting the public beaches, and second, how do I become part of the solution instead of the problem being continued on. And I think that we've had some viable solutions for that. And it'll be interesting to see how this progresses through the code revision process. So thank you for your comments. Yes, sir.
Maintain to be pretty out of the public eye, except for on the envisioning page. But my name is Robert Morales. I'm the owner of 38 Shade Beach Service, disabled veteran in the United States Air Force. And it's tough to say as far as, with delivery vendors, especially with Mr. Chip here, who, like the gentleman over there said, he's the forefront of the industry. And, I have a lot of respect for Mr. Chip, and as do the rest of us. And, I started as a delivery vendor when I first came in, and now I'm more privately based. And that's one big distinction that I think does need to be set clear, is what is public and what is private. One of the things, perfect example for me as far as on the along the lines of Redfish Village. So Blue Mountain is actually a very small public access there. And I purposely do not set up on the public access. If you've ever gone down to that access, you have not seen my sets on the public section of the beach, only on the private section. And I do that on purpose. I do the same thing on Ed Wallene. If you come down to Ed Wallene, anytime, the only time I've ever had a beach service set up on the public beach access is if it was special needs, and I have one on Friday. They requested to be right off that boardwalk. So I purposely do that because it is very limited on the public section. Now, maintaining a specific vendor on each regional location, it's tough for me to say that I'm for that or I'm opposed to that, because we're all in an industry together, believe it or not. So along those lines, there was talk of an association that was formed, and there was an attempt. But with that association, I did a lot of brainstorming on how to solve that problem. The problem is if you have the association and you have a position in which you have to enforce set rules, well, there's no real bite to the bark, if that is a good reference. There's no enforcement on that side. So what I'd like to see is something put into a code in which a person from the public is elected, a person appointed by the BCC is elected, and a person by the vendors is elected. So it's a three-person party in which any kind of violation that is set forth, it goes before that board, so it's an unbiased across the board, on that violation, and that then determines their punishment, which is then observed by the TDC. I think that's one of the ways to help alleviate some of these issues on the public beaches. Neighborhood accesses, it's tough to say because in Seagrove, a lot of those houses north, it is public section down there, and part of the issue with D8. So I did an official records request, just so you know. And as far as private property on what's contracted, it's 27,600 feet of beach, which equivalates to 5.2 miles out of the 26 miles. So as far as private property contracted with private vendors, you're looking at about 20%. Okay, so you take that and you add it on to public beach, and there's 6 miles of public beach across the entire section, so that's another 3 miles. So you're getting a little over
let's
30%.
clarify that statement. A large portion of that state park.
Okay, correct. So
Very, very large portion of that state park.
yes, which I know the TDC does open up for the general public.
But there's no
top sale.
Yeah, but there's only a small. Matt with Graton Beach and Deer Lake State Park allows vending by delivery vendors, but they can only bring it when the customer wants it. And so,
Correct.
so when you start equating public beach versus private beach, and then the further equations of what's vended and not vended, you got to make sure that you understand that your 5 miles of public beach is state park beach.
Yes, sir. In regards to what I was saying, in setups, because of there is such a large demand, I completely understand setting up once the guest comes down on a public beach, in which some of these regional accesses, I think that can work. The only exception to the rule, I would say, would be Graton, just because of, now, this is something that hasn't been talked about, but how many 5Ks do you know that start at 11 o'clock in the morning in July? None, because heat casualties left and right. And I've tracked my workouts throughout the summer as far as setting up the beach and whatnot. I average running about 10 miles a day. And that's in the early morning and the late evening. So you crunch that into the hottest hours of the day in July, and I mean, even if you've got 3-4 guys, I mean, you're still kind of teetering on the brink of, health issues on that side of things.
Are you familiar with the commercial construction industry?
No, sir.
The roofers and framers and sheetrockers and all that, they work 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. during the hot day. And so I get your point, but let's keep it in perspective. I mean, it's part of the industry. And to make an argument that you can't work during the heat of the day to service your client that's down there during the heat of the day is not a good argument.
Okay. Fair enough. As far as the association being formed, I think that committee would help alleviate and further enforcement.
Okay. All right. So we're an hour and 15 minutes into a 2-hour meeting, and I would like to hear from more vendors. If now's your time to speak, and let's talk. Anyway, Dave.
Well, the last words that you spoke, further enforcement, I think that's a good suggestion to have some sort of a committee. The folks that break the rules are rules. Folks that break the rules make it hard on everyone, and that's across the board. There's majority of these vendors are trying to follow the rules, and then all it takes is a few. I'm in an industry that's highly regulated. I have to keep my restaurants clean. I gotta, follow the rules. So by whatever means that we can rein that in, I think that would help things tremendously.
Okay.
I honestly believe that if the BCC can fix or adjust the DA part of, I mean, the crowds that a lot of folks are complaining about at the regional public beach accesses, if you took these sets of chairs and umbrellas and you scattered them out along the beach, little common sense, if you're not staying in the Gulf Front house, we'll find a spot on the property line. But the way it's played out the last few years, a crowd of 20 sets of chairs and umbrellas that might have run for a half a mile or a mile in Seagrove or in Duneallen or wherever has now been condensed on to Edwall Lane or Goat Feathers. I won't even haven't taken a rental at a county access in 2 or 3 years. And when they call me asking, depending on the access, I'll send them to a vendor that's got an on-site man, because I know I wouldn't want to come to the beach and have to sit 1.5 feet away from somebody that I didn't know, 6 rows deep. Not going to be a good experience. They're not going to come back and see us. They might even go online and trash Walton County. So, you know, I don't mind at all not making a buck, sending them someplace where they'll enjoy, sending them to a guy that maybe can help them and they'll have a good time and come back and see us again.
Yeah.
And that's, I'll pass my.
I think the guy in the back would like to speak.
Hi, I'm Lacey with Beach Services, Inc., and I'm down there at Miramar Beach. I own a little portion in front of Mediterranean and exclusive rights in front of Pompanos, and my husband and I donated 3.9 acres at the where the parking lot is, and to the county. And in that agreement we had with the county is the only thing, instead of getting paid, that we would be able to just set up chairs and umbrellas. And in the purpose of that, giving that to the county, it was the purpose of, we need everybody to have beaches to go to. And in the respect of that, I do vend. This is the way I make my living. My husband passed away 9 years ago, and we've been doing this beach service since 1994. So I can say I'm a grandmother here. And you're going to have the pros and the cons. But I tell you what, I've got a beautiful system. Our system, we work with the county, and I like people to have space. I want people to be able to go to our beaches. Our beaches are the most profound, beautiful beaches. I love that we do have I want to say thank you to code enforcement and thank you for the county, because you help keep it safe for us. Our business, I pay men. My men are on that beach. They come in, they set up, they're on the beach. And it's not just, for the sale of the chair, but also when you're there, we're there to make sure you're comfortable, to make sure you're protected if a storm comes. Those umbrellas are legal weapons, that we put them down. We want to make sure everybody's happy. And if we've gotten to the point where I'm located, we've got a lot of people. So I got people that want season passes, so they call me up, and I've had them for years. We've got people with the Newman Daily. We work with Newman Daily, so we know how many numbers to put out. Now, what we do is if somebody hasn't shown up by 11 o'clock, and we have a card, we put the cards on the umbrella. If they haven't shown up by 11 o'clock, we take that card down. And we just keep their card, so it could be available for somebody else, but they lose their chance then, Yeah. Sorry,
That's all right. Yeah. So Lacey has a little bit different arrangement than everybody else does on a public beach. As she explained, her family donated the land to the county, stipulation that her family gets to vend exclusive on the beach. And so she kind of operates in a way that a managed vendor program would operate, except that we don't have to have an agreement as to how she's going to do her daily operations on that beach. Thank you, Lacey. Yeah, Chandler.
This really has nothing to do with beach chairs, but I'm a beach vendor as a photographer.
Mhm.
And one of those rules that were passed this past spring, I believe, was for drone photography not to have any drones launched off public beaches. So you get into not getting into FAA regulations, you get into myself just focusing on what I do along with the revenue stream of photography, but say if it's not a paid gig, one, I am a beach vending photographer.
Right.
So the problem is that on public beaches, they passed a law that no drones are allowed to be launched. I do agree, and a big factor because it keeps teens or younger kids or irresponsible flyers from just launching from the beach access. The problem with that is that it's just a blanket policy where it needs to be more defined for the 42 beach vendors that are photographers and have liability insurance and have all their coverage and approved by the county. They need to be able to have access to be able to fly. And it doesn't need to be commercial. Commercially gets an FAA. If you look at the SWARA, any of these, the TDC are always asking for content, and they never pay. That's okay. I'm proud and I'm glad to be able to promote this area, but it's kind of a double-edged sword for that end because half of those drone flights or whatever, there's not payment that's going into it. It's for hobby, it's for enjoyment, or it's to help promote non-for-profits. So the problem is the drones not being launched. The solution is allowing the beach vendors that are approved on your list to be able to.
I think that's, Chandler, I think that, definitely a solution, a problem, and the solution is fairly easy, is amending the language in the code that allows drones or UASs by, it could be as simple as authorized users. That would be a blanket of people that have a vending permit for photography, or it could be, by permit, receive an annual permit, or something like that. I think we can get that pretty easily amended in the code to satisfy commercial photography on the beach by drone. So the way the process works is we go through these workshops, different advisory committees. The TDC is an advisory committee to the BCC. Their meeting will be October 2nd, and then more than likely it will be on the BCC meeting scheduled for October 9th. And what they'll do there is they'll listen to the presentation that I'll put together that has these possible recommendations. Of course, they will be supplied that information prior to the meeting. And so that they may choose to hear some of it, or they may not choose to hear it because they have to set a public hearing out in the future. And I believe that's a 14-day notification period. Is that right, Jay? And so the next opportunity would be at the second meeting in October, which would be October 23rd. And so that would be when the actual draft revisions would be read in a public hearing and then voted on by the Board of County Commissioners. Okay. So the next meeting, TDC, October 2nd. The BCC meeting, October 9th. Both those be key to get up and speak. Once again, based on our conversations earlier in the year, we're including this in the revision recommendations. Okay.
Hey, Brian. Dave Meadows with La Dolce Vita Beach Service. You keep wanting the vendors to say something. So right now, I'm totally in favor of removing D8. Because D8, in my opinion, over the years, I've just watched the vendor zones and the areas just shrink and shrink and shrink. And it's moving us all into those tiny little ones that we're sharing 50% of right now with the public. And don't forget, with the vendor zone, it's not just for the vendor. It is for the public too. So the fight, truly, there's a two battlefront there. There's the vendor fighting with the other vendor trying to get the front row spot. Not dry sand, front row.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And then the other fight is with the public on trying to get the same thing. So customary use, even though if it ever comes back into play, it's still not going to fix those problems if D8 doesn't get removed. and certain other things don't change in the code also. There's so many rules and regulations in the code that just contradict what you're trying to accomplish. You need to remove some of these things, go back in and change the language, be a little bit more specific on some things instead of it being so vague. Because there's a lot of terms in there that are open to interpretation, and it has changed over the years that have affected a lot of the vendors. I'm for accountability. I want the county to make money off the vendor. However you want to come up with that program, come up with a program. But probably 90+% of the state of Florida already has that program in place on their public beaches. It's your public beach. You should be making money off it. One way or another, come up with a plan. Multiple vendors, one vendor, I don't care. Because whatever it is, our company is going to adapt, and we'll do whatever you tell us to do because that's the business we're in. If I have to set up my chairs when a customer comes down, I'll do it. If you want to get rid of seasonal ghost sets now, I'll do it. Whatever needs to be done, we will do. If I need to change my umbrella rubber bands, I will. We've had that conversation. That's right. So, you know, I police the areas. I get on my bicycle and I ride up and down the beaches and clean up every single off-site area that I have. I pick up all the trash and so forth. And we care about our community. We care about our employees, and we care about our customers. And our client, majority of our client, is a private property owner. We probably do 1%, maybe 2% is deliveries. Everything else is on a private contract. But what we do in the public, we feel it is a privilege and an honor that you let us do it. But we'd like the rules to be fair to the vendor and to the public.
Yep.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, Dave. Thank you for your comment about the ambiguous verbiage and all that. That's one thing I've strived to do over the last 4 years is to remove ambiguity and add clarification, because I truly believe that a code that is easy to understand by the user and easy to enforce by the enforcement body makes for a better place. So any particular instances, I'd appreciate it if you would send to me. I may not have detected all of them, obviously. I've found it's very hard to write code. You know, it's got to be done in very short, choppy sentences. You cannot do this. Down, boy. Okay, is there any more comments? We're an hour and a half into the meeting. Doesn't have to last 2 hours. Just want to make sure everybody had an opportunity to speak. All right, got one guy here in front or in the back.
Hey, how you doing? I'm Mike with Shoreline Beach Service.
Okay.
Just a couple thoughts I've had throughout the meeting. First of all, I think that meetings between frustrated citizens and the vendors more often could accomplish a lot of solutions to our problems, because the vendors, by and large, want to work well with the community. So I think that would be a good thing to help the problems in general. I do think, though, as rules are changed, that there needs to be a way to consider how they would affect the general public or vendors and everybody involved, because what happens, I've noticed, let's say that you had changed the rules where a person had to come down there in the morning, which is not necessarily the worst thing in the world, but I could only imagine 40 people down there at the Turtle Watch waiting for their spot to get in line. And then once they get in line, they do the exact same thing. They go home and don't come down to the beach till 4 o'clock or 2 o'clock. So it would so we got to think through our solutions that could cause other problems, or solutions that wouldn't really fix the problem. You know what I'm saying?
I agree with you 100%.
Consider. I do think the rubber band issue, if there's a way to get, I think they're biodegradable. I could be wrong. And I don't know if it's that or the color that is, I know it's a problem if they're just left everywhere. But I would say if there's a way we could solve that, I'm sure a lot of vendors would work with that. You know what I'm saying? And just being available to hear y'all's concerns, we want to help. I mean, I do. I wrote down a few other things, if you'll bear with me to look at my notes just for a second. One of the things I've noticed, I had a customer that has used me several times, and she came down to the beach and she was frustrated because she said, Mike, there's no room for me to go and set up. And I said, well, ma'am, you have half the beach over here. And I said, there's only one row deep on the public side of the public access. And she's like, well, there's a lot of people on the other side. And I said, well, I understand that, but I said, we're only allowed to set up in those spots. And she said, well, I don't like it. And I said, well, I don't know what you don't like. I mean, you can go right over there. There's only one row deep of the general public, and we're 3 or 4 because we're trying to go by the rules. And so she went to the left on a non-public area, and I told her, I said, you know, I don't know what the rules are over there, but you certainly are welcome to do that. I can't do that. If you want me to go over there, I just can't. So sometimes there's frustration with a person that's frustrated with the whole situation, but they don't know the rules. They
Right.
don't necessarily think through the ramifications of the rules changing, you know, those types of things. So it's just sometimes if you solve a problem, it causes other problems, if that makes sense.
I live it every day.
Yeah, you know. I think with the ghost sets are frustrating. They're frustrating for vendors as well because we're not wanting to do extra work for someone that says they're going to pay for a set and they never come down there. But I think that it would, even if they weren't, even if they said they were going to go down in the morning and they just call us, some people would just lie. I mean, I'm not even going to think
I agree.
do that, but they would call and say, hey, set me up down there, and they're just saying they're going to come down, they won't ever do it. Or if they do come down in the morning and then just leave their sets down there. What about people that go to lunch for 3 hours? I mean, it's frustrating for everybody. But if it wasn't a vendor doing it who's trying to go by the rules, it would also be a person in the general public that would do the exact same thing, wouldn't drill in their umbrellas, and they'd go flying further because they go flying a lot further than ours do. They just don't. If you try to take the vendors who are trying to do the rules and abide by the rules out of the scenario, it could get a lot worse because you're going to have people, oh, I put my towel down there. And then there's fist fights because they put their towel down there rather than a professional looking chair or whatever they are going to do to reserve their spot. It's just human nature to have
Oh, yes,
those
sir.
fights.
I agree
And
with you.
we want to try to alleviate those issues, but there's we're doing our best.
Right. And let me respond to that real quick.
Yes,
So we're looking at, we recognize that those are problems too. You have problems associated with vendors. You have problems associated with the general public coming down there. So we're looking at some ideas. One of them in particular is us having an attendant in the form of a beach ambassador at each regional beach access. And that is purely to give, to have a person there that looks like has some authorization, but to remind people, hey, if you're leaving for the day, why don't you take your stuff with you? Close your umbrella, if you're leaving for an hour to go to lunch. And try to help people stay what I call in bounds with code and with just basic beach etiquette. It's one thing we've gotten away from as human beings is just basic etiquette to our fellow man that's enjoying the same resource we're enjoying. So yeah, I agree with you on that. That we solved a vendor issue. We may have another sister issue with the general public that we also have to consider.
I'd also say I agree with Robert in the sense that if there was a way to have general public and vendors or anybody that's involved to help have a little more authority in regulating some of these issues within our industry, because we try to regulate, but we don't really have the ability to regulate other vendors that we know are doing something wrong. Not that we want to come in and police everybody, but if there was some kind of happy medium between the county, us, and citizens or something along those lines, I like that.
That's not a bad idea. Typically what happens in an industry is they form an industry association and they start, setting up, I won't say rules, but standards that everybody operates by. And then normally the progression of that is they then take that to a regulating or governing body and they say, hey, we would like for you to write into your regulations that members of this industry have to be members, or in order to do business with you, they have to be members of this industry. Now, that's a big leap right there. Not a big leap to start an industry association. I say it's not a big leap. I understand that there's been some efforts by different groups, and then as you do that, you recognize that you're actually two groups. Your delivery vendors and your specific place vendors. Some of you are in both of them, and those have different standards, But that's where it needs to start is within the industry, and then try to move that into some sort of part of the county's requirements for doing business on county property. And I like the idea of having more meetings where people can express their griefs and all that. The rubber band issue was something I tried a little bit different this year. This was a problem presented to me, and I asked our admin people to send out a very what I call nice email reminder. Instead of hammering down, can't use rubber bands. Just put it out there as, hey, here, this has been brought to us. Please take a look at it and see what we can do. And it worked, apparently, to a certain extent. But so yeah, I'm all for that. We can have more meetings. You'll see more blast emails from us, asking for the industry to take a look at this problem that's been presented, and it's actually an opportunity for y'all to self-regulate.
Definitely, if there's a way to, within the self-regulation, if you have any suggestions, we'd love to do that. And I don't know how it works outside of this industry, but if there are ways that an industry could be allowed to have more say, or if the county suggests that, hey, these are going to be the guidelines, so that maybe a new vendor that wants to apply for a vendor license would be forced to go through some hurdles. I know you guys already have some in place, but if we could do some of those things in conjunction with the county, maybe to regulate. And I don't know if this will step on anybody's toes, but possibly just not. I have a friend in Pensacola. He says they only allow so many. Once you're already in, you've got a permit. Maybe not allowing new ones. And I know that may.
There's been some talk of a moratorium on permits. The county. It basically is pro small business. They want people to have opportunity. They also want people to, take that opportunity and not exploit it or abuse it and cause grief, for other aspects of the community. And so once again, we all circle back around to self-regulation and all that. But there's always opportunity for vendors as individual vendors or as a loosely held group or a tightly held group to send us recommendations. My email is, I take input all day long from people. Some of it's positive input, some of it's negative, some of it's just completely out of bounds. But I take it all in, and I try. Like I say, you've heard me say it. My job is to create harmony on the beach. And so this is what this whole effort right here is for. Our preseason vending meeting is kind of what you just alluded to, get people oriented to what we expect, what the rules are. Any new vendors that come in, they have to watch our video of these meetings. I'm looking at doing something a little more abbreviated and focused instead of just watching the meeting. It would actually be a presentation of the different code sections. And we want people to be in the know. They sign a piece of paper that say, I do understand Chapter 22, in particular Chapter 2260. But then there's always a learning curve when they get out there. But
one last thing, and that is just for vendors within our community, is that I like this lady's idea on the front. I know it's different on her beach, but the concept that if a person wasn't, rather than having to set the chairs up later, and that might be something that has to come or not, but if it was a way to say by 9 or 10 o'clock if you're not down there, unfortunately, we've got to remove your set. And that would be more regulation within our area to keep people from just renting them and then they go to they go deep sea fishing and don't even go down there that day.
So that
maybe require them to tell us in advance or something.
Yeah, so that's managing ghost sets.
Yeah.
And I've had many discussions with different vendors in here about that, and there's different mechanisms to do it. I think what it comes down to is the labor required to service that customer or that chair during the day.
Yeah, and then possibly, of course, some companies don't have as many staff persons. Not that I'm a large company, but
right.
And then also the possibility of requiring customers to tell us when you leave. Not everybody would do that, but if they said, I'm leaving at 2 o'clock, and then we took some chairs down to give more space for other people or those types of things, might be some more self-regulation.
I think it's a good idea. I don't know if it can be codified or should be. I think that would be something that works within the industry, and somebody made a point is, well, your customer's just going to lie to you. Yeah. Okay, well, create the atmosphere where your customer won't lie to you. Explain, hey, if you're not going to use your chair today, we got some congestion issues on our beach, and we're trying to do our part. How about helping us do our part? And by the way, if you do that, I'll give you a little bit of a discount.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, so there's ways to, you know, create, you know, the behavior you want from your customer. You know, our communications guy, Dave Demarest, can help you with that. Where's Dave? Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Eric Johnson, the owner of Miramar Beach Service. Some years in the past, I think it was about 4 years ago, there was a program where y'all offered the beach vendors access to the Visit Florida program. It was an online course.
Yeah.
I took advantage of it. My whole crew used it. It was really good info. It was stuff on how to work with the public, simple things.
Yeah,
There
it was,
rules about like
yeah.
make eye contact at 15 feet,
Yep.
offer your hand at 5 feet.
That was our sponsor, service industry training program.
That was the one.
Jay, do we still have that?
It was a great program.
Yeah.
And I haven't heard anything about it since. And when we're talking about the vendors and all these rules, and when we talk about the vendors, every time we meet, it's always these same faces in the room, it seems like. It's not the kids that are actually setting up the chairs on the beach. It's the people that are the bosses of the kids setting up on the beach, with some exceptions. Some of us are the ones carrying the chairs. A similar program that these kids could sign on to that told them these things, I think would be a great thing that would solve some of the issues that we're having.
Good idea. I think we can probably find some resources that we can make available online. Once again, I think it would take you as a industry member to make sure your employees, you know, but I think, you know, those resources are readily available. We'll see what we can do to make some available online. Okay?
Real quick, 2 questions. Could you speak to TDC trash removal? What's happening now? What's going to happen in the future?
Okay, yeah.
Code enforcement, driving on the beach, what's happening now? What's happening in the future?
Right, okay. So TDC trash removal, after July 1st, we received several cease and desist demand letters from private property owners mandating we do not traverse their beach with any TDC employees. The initial reaction by the BCC was to discontinue garbage collection on all private property. We requested an opportunity to revisit with these people to have them reconsider now that we know the full impact. They did. Half of them reconsidered. We were able to get back to about 60% of the beach. There's still a large area between Western Lake and Paradise by the Sea, which is adjacent to Alice Beach, that we can't get to. So we looked at alternative solutions of getting to those areas. So the problems that we have with getting to them is the cease and desist demand letters that still exist, the entry points that our trucks use to get onto the beach, and then the coastal dune lakes that are often broke out now. Some of those solutions were staging equipment on the beach to use it, so we have some gators that we use, getting some temporary access through state parks to get onto the beach. And then the other solution is that the people that still have the cease and desist mandate, one of their arguments is that we would use garbage collection for bolstering customary use. And so we're working on an agreement that says that we wouldn't do that. When I say we, I'm talking about Walton County Legal Department. So we're working on the language of that agreement, and we think that we can be successful with it. And so legal's working on that. We hope to have an answer. When I say fairly quickly, I'm talking, you know, a couple of weeks or so, maybe a month, because there's always a back and forth between lawyers on what that language will contain. If that happens, we'll be able to get back to all the beach, and we'll resume garbage collection like we used to, okay? The public beach accesses that are within that area that I described we can't get to, we're servicing those from the top. And so we're still managing our public beach garbage like we did. Beach code enforcement, so they fell into that category of TDC employees or county employees to not traverse beaches. And the legal department basically gave us a directive that we need to handle our coverage of the beach below the mean high water line or below the erosion control line. And of course, we can travel public beach because we own it. And so, like I said before, we have a lot of public beach, Seagrove, Sea Highlands area, Dune Allen area. There's some other patches of it that are associated with some neighborhood beach accesses. But Code Enforcement Department has changed their ways. We use ATVs and we use walking as means of being a proactive approach on beach. You may not see us as much as you used to driving, our trucks down the beach. With customary use, I feel that any customary use law or code that comes into play will come with heavy use restrictions. And when we had the previous customary use code as a county code, the biggest user of us in enforcing customary use was the private property owner. And so my assumption would be that with any form of customary use code or law, there would also be the component of you got to have strict code enforcement, and that would put us back traversing the beach. We're looking at ways of reducing our footprint. Obviously, our new vehicles will be Jeeps. You'll probably see more ATV, UTV use, and a lot of walking. Actually, very effective in the walking mode. People don't see your white truck coming down the beach.
How many out of the 26 miles of beach? How many miles are getting trash pickup right now, or how many are not getting trash pickup?
Okay, so we have 26 miles of beach. You take out the 5.6 miles for state park that we don't do. That leaves 20 miles. We're not getting, or we're getting about 60% of that. So whatever that math is. Yeah. So we're getting almost all the garbage out of the Scenic Gulf Drive area, everything west of Topsail. Small patch between Sand Trap and Norwood, which is right there by the eastern end of Scenic Gulf Drive. And then everything on this end of the beach except an area down by Stallworth Lake, and then an area in and around the Oyster Lake area headed east, and then that area between Western Lake and Paradise by the Sea neighborhood, which is on the eastern end of Alice Beach.
We'd love to see the trash pickup resume as normal.
We would too. We would too. We think it's a valuable thing that we do as a TDC maintenance operations. We have them at all public beach accesses. We have them at bed tax collections. I mean, the majority of our beach garbage collection stations are on private property. I mean, we have some that are located that aren't bed tax collectors. We do it simply because we think it's an important function. So, yes.
I'm just curious on, are there any kind of violation, might be a little tricky now with watercolor in the Hilton area, have been my experience as far as where it's been the worst. Watercolor being the biggest problem. The beaches are, if you go down at Sunset, you see the plastic cups, and you can just see the litter like all down the resort beaches. Are there any kind of, I have photos. I stayed one night and just picked up, threw away like tons of towels and put it up there by the trash bins. Are there any kind of repercussions or any kind of anything that can be done to, I don't think it's where you'd go over and see Larry's Beach in Seaside and it's pristine. The beaches are, upkept. There's no trash on the beaches, and you have watercolor, which is not necessarily it is a managed beach, but it's not really managed.
Right.
So what happens in that case when, if somebody sees it or reports it, or if there's trash and there, repeatedly amounts of trash on these managed beaches?
Yeah. Well, it's funny that one of the bigger resort communities in our resort complexes in our community, allows that to happen. And normally, the problem is solved by that private property owner. There are some, language in there around littering, but most of that language is, regulates public property, somebody throwing trash down on a beach. There are areas of the other parts of the municipal code and land development code that address unkept property. The problems you note usually are on a daily basis and they're not on a continued basis. I mean, though it happens daily every day. I mean, if I could tell you how many towels we picked up under the Leave No Trace program, you'd be astounded. And I'm always surprised that nobody from Watercolor has said something about the amount of towels they must replace for the ones we picked up as garbage on the beach. The other thing is, as our guys, when we talk about garbage collection, we're collecting garbage from the stations. We don't pick up garbage off the flat, sandy portion of the beach. If there's old chairs or old umbrellas or whatever that are obviously abandoned, we'll get those, Most time people pull those up next to our garbage collection stations. But we don't go down and pick up, just regular garbage. The general public, our Volunteer Beach Ambassador program, does a wonderful job of getting garbage on the beach, either that they generated or they found, up to our garbage collection stations. But in the case of Watercolor, if it got real bad and there was a bunch of complaints to it, I think it would be citizens' complaints to the Watercolor, resort. And be quite honest with you, I'm surprised that people within that resort have not complained about it to the point where they would do something better. I'm not exactly familiar with the amount of garbage that's left on that beach on a daily basis, but
I think there are complaints. It's just to the HOA or to the POA.
Yeah.
And the bigger, I guess, overall question, if this is a, quote, managed beach and Walton County isn't helping or holding accountable this managed beach because of the trash amount, you go down there any given day in the summer, there's trash left out of the beach, not bags of trash, but just littered up and down the beach, and there isn't accountability from Walton County to a managed beach. Is kind of my point. How is that going to be, or are there plans to correct that?
Brian, can I help you on that?
Yeah.
It's two things that happens right there as far as the enforcement goes. The ordinance also says that the beach vendor is responsible for any garbage or trash generated within 100 feet of his sets. What happens a lot of times is those resort areas pull all their chairs up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock or whatever time, and then all of the folks that come down to hang out for the sunset with their plastic cups with their night juices in it, they just watch the sunset and leave the trash where the vendor's gone home for the day. So that takes the enforcement off the vendor. But when the vendor comes back out in the morning, part of their duties when they set up is to clean up. So you see those guys cleaning up when they set up in the morning on those resort type areas. The issue that we get into with the enforcement is, think about it, compare it to a traffic stop for speeding. If you see a car go by and there's 8 people in it and they're running 70 and 55, and when you stop down the road, there's 7 people standing outside of the vehicle that was doing over the speed limit, which one of them dropped the cup? Which one of them was mashing the pedal? So we have to be able to articulate that Miss Lacey is the one that dropped the cup that was the trash prior to issuing the citation. So the enforcement side's hard when you find garbage after the matter versus something that you physically see somebody throw down, and then it puts us in a bind with the vendors because they clean up quitting time, and then they're not there. So who do you enforce that
But this
against?
is on a resort. This isn't a delivery. So this is Watercolor.
Yeah. So in Watercolor,
that's who's accountable. That's who.
I don't disagree, but who do you write the ticket to for the litter? Because
You don't like you hold a Watercolor accountable. That's what you do.
Okay. Well, tell us.
The individual.
Tell us how.
It's on Watercolor, so it's considered private property, right? So you have this accountable managed resort that isn't managing the natural resources that are there. So between 6 a.m. or 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., and then you get into the environmental aspect of it, where you're going to have more marine life, you're going to have more winds, you're going to have more surf come up. So Watercolor's one accountable, not the individual tourist that's on the beach littering the chair. Sure,
So
each vendor regulation ends at 4:30 or 5 o'clock, whatever they need to do. It doesn't mean because they're making revenue, that's their storefront.
Okay. So you have to allow, by the statute, you have to allow reasonable time to cure. So the vendor cleans up when he tears down in the afternoon. The litter happens throughout the night. And then,
But also through the day.
well, but if the vendors clean up when they tear down, so then between 5 o'clock and dark or whatever, you generate additional trash from the sunset crowd. Well, what's reasonable time to cure? So if we say, look, you have to clean the beach, what's a reasonable time for them to do that? So if we give them till 8 o'clock in the morning, is that a reasonable time to cure, or is it they have to have it done by dark or midnight? Or I guess I'm just looking for what is your input or your direction
Well, my
on
point,
reasonable
and
time
it's
to
a
cure
good
the
point of people
violation.
coming down, but if you go down at sunset, there's already trash there. The trash occurs throughout the day. It's a laziness, the heat of the day, it's full occupancy, everybody's burnt out, 4th of July, middle of July. Beach vendor, the last thing they're gonna do is be proactive because they gotta get up early and do it all over again. So you go down at sunset, the trash is already there. I mean, they're watching sunset, but you can see trash all the way there. Sure, there's more gonna be created. So my suggestion would be have the vendors have it where the code is written where, you know, after sunset, that's where it has to be cleaned up. This is not the majority on, I don't think this is the majority. As I mentioned, this is what I've experienced with mainly the Hilton and Watercolor being the worst of what I've seen. So I don't know as far as time frame on the vendor because it's taxing on everybody, but it's also taxing on the environmental end of it because the trash, the majority of the trash, if I had to bet, isn't after sunset. It is a good portion of it, but you can take somebody like Watercolor who isn't a small business owner, who isn't really engaged in caring in their product, I guess, as far as like a beach vendor, and it's a masses, and you get less quality or less accountability.
Yeah. I think this is an area that we can take a look at and see. Once again, we can enforce the code as it's written. Vendors got to pick up after themselves. So what you're portraying to us is that they're not. And so we'll take a look at it and keep an eye on it and see if we can get some behavior change, and take action that we can under the code.
Yeah, that was my original question. What are the repercussions or what
Yeah,
happens?
Yeah, unfortunately, the repercussion is, a violation of that particular section of the code, and then a monetary, citation with a monetary fine that goes up in $100 increments and tops out at $500. But like I say, I think that, once again, I haven't observed it personally. I get out on the beach some, not as much as I'd like to, but Jeff's got his in his notes, and we'll keep on that beach here. Once again, not a busy time of the season. They probably do a better job than they do during the summer, but when things pick up next summer, it'll be something on our list to take a look at. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
There was a program in the past, I think, that helped the employees of the vendors.
Yeah. So what he's referring to is a typical industry association, and those need to be, developed, generated and developed within the industry itself. You don't really want your governing body trying to tell them what they need to do as an industry. We do that now by code. And so there has been some efforts by some what I call, people in the industry that want to make that effort. You also have to understand that some people in the industry don't have any use for that type of industry association, and so that's why they were talking about it's hard to get one started and to keep it maintaining, and then the purpose of the industry association is to make the whole industry better.
I guess my point is that if someone does sort of start that up, and then if the association amongst the vendor companies does start to work, then there's other people that you can draw in as well. I was just thinking in terms of the volunteer beach ambassadors, the Turtle Watch folks that can also put some of the information that will help educate the employees of the vendors. So it's more of the association is for the vendors, but also other people or other groups for the community. It's a really good opportunity, I think, to.
It is. It is. It is, but like I said, it has to be developed from within the industry. In other words, the members, the people associated with that industry have to put it together and to get the buy-in. You know, it's all voluntary. And so they have to, you know, motivate the other members to understand the benefit and importance of it. And then these other, after you get this industry up and running and working like it should, that's when you start using resources available to you to make the industry association even better. Like that we were talking about earlier, this service association or service industry training thing we had. It was put on by Visit Florida, I guess. And it was, you know, an online training thing of how, you know, to make your employees service, you know, or be better to the clients you're servicing. And it was free. We allowed people to do it. And I think what happened with that is the state association that was doing that, they stopped doing it because it's supposed to have like 18 modules or something. They got through 2 modules and something happened. The feed quit coming from the state industry. But it does have to come within that industry. If we mandate it, we tell you got to do it, it ain't going to work. It's not going to work. If they put it together themselves and motivate all the members or all the people in that industry to participate, or the majority of them, it'll start to work. But you got to understand that some of these businesses are very small. They're, you know, a mom and pop organization, and they actually do something else in between setting up chairs in the morning and taking them down in the evening. And, you know, this is, say, a side business, extra income or whatever. And then some of them are true, you know, bona fide businesses. They're a Florida corporation. They provide insurance to their employees. You know, there actually are employees versus contract labor, and they have a storefront. And so it's a hard industry to bring together under one umbrella, to be honest with you. And then, like I said, you have the difference between delivery and specific. Whole different set of really standards you operate by. Most specific place vendors are bound by the contract or agreement they have with the property owner, like Rosemary Beach's, you know, vendor service. They're in-house, Seaside's person. You know, they all have, you know, it's a different set of standards, I would think. And that's the challenges I've been told. Yes, sir.
Yes, I would like to make a note that the differentiation might be between beach service, which is what Cabana is, what Beach Chairs for You, what Steve is. You have some vendors and vendor companies. The office where you call to order your chairs doesn't have a clue as to what a beach is, how the beach is played.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of difference between a vending company and a beach service.
Yeah, I agree.
A lot of difference.
Yeah, it all brings challenges. Okay. Yes, sir.
We've given that, we've given that a fair shot because we do generally care about the community and want to follow the rules. The main issue being is that a commissioner in front of me in a meeting asked the county attorney one time, they said, can we make, as a county, there be an association, if they have their own industry association, can we force people to join it that want to be a part of this industry, getting a permit through Walton County? And the quick answer from the county attorney was no, you're not. So we're an industry that's a little bit behind the times, that some people frankly don't want to be told what to do. And that's okay. We're all being forced to, essentially is what it's coming down to, is we're being forced to come together. But that's the ultimate reason why there's not an association that's bigger than it is because people don't have to participate.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as things are going as status quo, they're going to keep doing what they're doing. And that's not a knock against anybody. It's just they don't really have a benefit to join
Right.
until rules change that could drastically harm their business, and then there may be a benefit to joining the association.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Or, like I say, or as a association member, you could motivate them to understand the benefits in an industry association that is not mandated to be in. See what I'm saying? Okay. Any more questions or comments people would like to say today? Yes, ma'am. Finally got the courage to speak, huh? Okay. Mhm. Yes, ma'am. I understand. It is. You know, for a long time we were enjoyed, you know, uninhibited beach weddings, and you know, I would venture a guess that 25 years ago, beach weddings were, you know, the bride and groom, a few attendants, mom and dad, 10 chairs, and a very small arbor. And then over the years, they progressed into, believe it or not, stoves on the beach, parquet flooring, truss-mounted lights, 150 attendees, and instead of just a beach wedding, let's have the rehearsal dinner and the welcome to the beach, you know, party, you know, on Thursday and Friday, and then wedding on Saturday. And so what happened was that beach, you know, wedding business exploited the resources, and the people that live here pushed back. And you know, the other thing is and I'm not saying, I'm not pointing you out by any means, I'm just saying what we've observed. The other problems is that, you know, 10 or 15 years ago, there was a big push to regulate what was called the wedding house. And that's because people were doing commercial enterprise in a residential neighborhood that wasn't equipped to handle it. I mean, you can't have a wedding with 150 people at Blue Mountain Beach Access, you know, there at Blue Mountain Road, because there's no parking. And so what do you do? And that's the reason why it's changed, is because what used to be a quaint little wedding on the beach turned into a very large commercial event. And as our community has changed from transient, you know, ownership, you know, primarily rental property, to more permanent resident, that's, you know, the affected people asked for it to be regulated. And then you throw in the customary use and the privatization of what was public beach by quiet title. You start ending up with, you know, less and less room for, you know, what used to be the quaint wedding. It's unfortunate, it is, because people should, you know, if they want to get married on the beach, they you know, should be able to do that. But we all got to recognize that, you know, what used to be a good venue that was cheap and all that is now a very congested public beach, or quite possibly private beach. And maybe that's not the best place to have that kind of wedding. So I know that industry has been heavily affected, but those are the real reasons why it's not, you know, once again, it goes back to, if people did not have large weddings like that, or they had them at the appropriate venue, because there are some houses that on the beach that can contain that. Not the parking, of course, but they have to get, they're getting special event permits from us. They have to have a few things where we can help limit or minimize this problem. But, you know, the public beach wedding on neighborhood beach access, if it's not small and quick and, you know, fairly contained, it's going to be, you're going to see less and less of those. Still a good deal, though, if you think about it. I mean, it's $1,500 to rent Eden State Park, I believe, and what's the lowest permit we have? 150? 150? 50? Less than 30 people is 150. Yeah. So, okay.
Real quick on B5, this
Mhm.
But it only states in there that it is a distance of 100 feet in any direction. So if the property is 2,000 linear feet, some of these guys might only, I'm not putting up 100 feet, around.
Mhm.
The entire property, so maybe changing the language to show the entire permitted section instead of just 100 feet. I mean, I don't know where that number came up from.
It was, it's part of the code that's been revised many times throughout the years, and it addressed what was a perceived problem then, and that has now changed. But by and large, most of the resort communities that have specific place vendors do an excellent job of it. That's why I'm a little confused about watercolor. I'm going to look into it personally here, and we'll definitely address it to make sure that what we can do within the code is done. And I have a relationship with the GM there. I'll say, hey, this is something that was brought to us. Are y'all aware of it? Maybe y'all need to change your practice on how you clean the beach. Because Jeff's is a valid point, is in order to take in code enforcement action, there has to be somebody there that you can, I don't want to say pin it on but that's the case. And so it's also understood that, okay, that's the vendor and they're not cleaning up after themselves. Well, we got to ascertain first to make sure who is truly the person leaving the garbage. And then there is that period of correct the action. If their standard practice is to clean it daily at 6 a.m. in the morning, then they're actually abiding by code to a certain extent. Could they do a better job? It sounds like it, but like I say, we have to verify and then help people become compliant. unless, okay, my bad, turtle text. See what I'm saying about codes? Hard to write. Chandler.
One last comment on the trash. I know I haven't done it in about 2 years, but the Surf Rider Foundation would do like an annual cleanup, Majestic Sun, side, that whole area. Is there any way during like spring, it's mainly springtime when more spring breakers come in, is there any way to have just like Panama City Beach does, just have trash, 50-gallon trash cans that are brought out to assist during that time frame? Trash? Because I think that would help.
Yeah. We actually, we try to adjust our number of collection stations at our public beach accesses based on our daily pickup. And so like at Grayton Beach, you've probably seen collection stations come and go. And we recognize during the summer that if we pick up our garbage in the morning, and if it's all overflowing, the next day or a couple of days later, whatever, we'll add more collection stations. And that's what we use instead of 55-gallon barrels. But so we do monitor that. Sometimes we don't maybe not do it as quick as we could, but that's a good suggestion during peak times. No, we don't put them out in the middle of the beach because it creates some issues with marine turtles, other environmental concerns. So all of our garbage collection stations are usually located at the toe of the boardwalk. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a good point, but that point doesn't always stick with environmentally concerned people.
How is that environmental impact?
Well, I try to put signs on the beach that were, help people understand the tent regulation. Well, it was a piece of PVC pipe, a garbage can on the beach would be a permanent fixture if I don't pick it up every day. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. So they take him in every night? They do? Like I say, I understand your point, but, every time we try to put something on the beach, there's always another group that says you can't put that on the beach. And I get it, spring breakers aren't the... I don't discount your logic at all. I'm just saying that if they're not picked up every day, people consider them an obstacle or an obstruction on the beach.
They would be picked up every day because those beaches are managed by the beach vendors within that 100 radius. That would be picked up every day.
Well, if the beach vendor could do it, certainly they would. They'll tell you that their operations cease at 5 o'clock and they're going to pull the garbage can in at that point. But I mean, Chandler, let's think about this. Our beaches in most points, except on the western end, are 100 feet deep from water's edge to the toe of the boardwalk. And to think that somebody can't walk 50 feet to put garbage in a garbage can, I mean.
It sounds like whether you clean up the beaches continually through the foundation or not, you realize that they don't.
Yeah. So maybe the education.
That would be my solution. I don't know if there's any other solutions out there, but
Yeah.
nothing that happens year after year after year with trash being on the beaches, specifically at the time.
Well, I don't think that's an accurate statement. We actually do pick up a lot of garbage on the flat portion of the beach during spring break. But I see your point, but I think some effort should be made on educating the people that are using the beach to put garbage in the appropriate garbage collection station. Don't you? I mean,
I don't think that that classification of people are not going to be educated in a time frame. You can write it in pamphlets and books and papers and property management and mail-outs. The fact is that you have spring breakers down here, and that is a mass amount of trash that's left on those specific beaches.
Mhm.
That hasn't changed. That hasn't changed.
Yeah.
Trash pickup. So the solution, I don't know if there's any other ones. Education is only going to go so far. If you have something that's easier
Mhm.
accessible that can be managed by a beach vendor,
Right.
it helps out that trash in those concentrated areas.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. By and large, except for a short period of time and from a certain clientele, people do a good job of getting the garbage from their day camp on the beach up to the garbage collection stations. I get your point. During spring break, we got to help the future leaders of America pick up garbage. And it's just a damn shame. Right. Yeah. Where's your beach? Watertown. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But also, one thing with those rubber bands, that has been a very horrible thing for the past decade that everybody uses, because nobody cleans it up, and I've watched it many times with my previous job with the lifeguard through South Walton that I worked for 16 years. Everybody clicks over the rubber band, breaks, they look at it, says, crack, let me grab another one. Do it again, crack, let me grab another one. So I've reached over to this beach service now that I've been doing for 3 years, and what we've done is we've had these 9-inch ball bungees that we use. You can usually use for tents.
Mm-hmm.
So we got rid of all those rubber bands, and those fit perfectly around our umbrellas. They don't bounce off or anything. And then when we set them up, we just tie them up top, and then now they're easy to grab again and put on. And that actually has reduced a tremendous amount of those rubber bands. So that when
There you go.
that nobody picks up and they get lost in the sand just like that.
Yeah. Good. Appreciate the input. Any more questions, comments? We've gone past our 2-hour mark. I'm getting hungry. I appreciate everybody coming today, and I appreciate the comments. The next meeting is September 25th. If you want to come to it, highly encourage you to come to the TDC meeting and the BCC meeting.
Charge the